The moment that would later dominate social media chatter reportedly began as a routine daytime discussion, with Denzel Washington seated calmly across from the hosts of The View, smiling politely as the audience applauded his entrance. Viewers at home expected a standard promotional appearance, but tension subtly crept in as the conversation shifted from film to politics and culture. According to audience members, Joy Behar's tone sharpened, and Denzel's relaxed posture slowly tightened, signaling that this interview was heading somewhere far less predictable than planned. As the discussion deepened, Joy Behar allegedly pressed Denzel on issues he has historically approached with nuance rather than slogans. She framed questions sharply, cutting off pauses and pushing for clear alignment. Denzel, known for his composed public demeanor, reportedly responded with measured words at first, emphasizing personal responsibility and lived experience. The studio atmosphere changed, with nervous laughter replacing applause, and cameras lingering on expressions that hinted something was about to break beneath the polished television surface. Sources claimed the turning point came when Joy challenged Denzel's past comments about success, race, and accountability, suggesting they ignored systemic realities. Denzel reportedly leaned forward, his voice firm but controlled, clarifying that his views were often taken out of context. He stressed that disagreement did not equal denial, and that real conversations required listening, not labeling. Audience members described a silence settling over the set, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. The exchange intensified when Joy allegedly interrupted again, prompting Denzel to pause longer than before. According to those present, he exhaled slowly, then spoke with unmistakable authority, reminding everyone that respect was non-negotiable. His words were not shouted, but their weight carried across the studio. Producers later hinted that this was the moment they realized the segment had veered off script, and damage control was already being discussed behind the cameras. Denzel reportedly explained that his career and life were built on discipline, faith, and accountability, values he refuses to dilute for applause. He emphasized that hard truths are often uncomfortable, especially on live television. The audience reaction was mixed, with some clapping hesitantly while others sat frozen. Joy, visibly taken aback according to viewers, attempted to redirect the conversation, but the emotional momentum had already shifted irreversibly. What some later called an eruption was less a loss of control and more a controlled release of long-held frustration. Denzel allegedly stated that he was tired of being framed as a villain for encouraging self-empowerment. He spoke about growing up without privilege and learning resilience through struggle. His tone remained intense yet deliberate, challenging the idea that disagreement must always be treated as hostility or ignorance. Joy Behar, according to reports, defended her position by saying tough questions were part of the show's format. Denzel responded by acknowledging that challenge is necessary, but respect is essential. He reminded the panel that conversation should not feel like an ambush. The audience could reportedly sense the clash of two strong personalities, neither willing to fully yield, each representing a broader cultural divide playing out live on television. Social media users later claimed the cameras cut to wide shots more frequently, a common tactic when producers anticipate viral moments. Denzel's facial expression, described as stern but focused, contrasted sharply with the nervous smiles around him. Some viewers felt they were witnessing an unscripted truth rarely allowed on daytime TV, while others believed the moment was being exaggerated by online narratives hungry for conflict. As the segment neared its end, Denzel reportedly delivered what many fans now quote as the core of his message. He said that disagreement should inspire thought, not outrage, and that shouting over one another solves nothing. His voice, according to those in attendance, never cracked, but the intensity made it feel louder than any outburst. Applause followed, uneven but genuine, signaling that many understood his point. Joy attempted to close the discussion on a lighter note, but the energy remained tense. Denzel nodded politely, thanking the hosts for the platform, though his body language suggested emotional exhaustion. Viewers later debated whether the moment was respectful confrontation or inappropriate television drama. Regardless of interpretation, the exchange had already etched itself into public memory as something far from ordinary. After the episode aired, clips circulated rapidly, often edited to heighten drama. Headlines used words like "erupts" and "stormed," though no footage showed Denzel raising his voice or leaving abruptly. Fans rushed to his defense, praising his composure under pressure. Critics, meanwhile, accused him of deflecting difficult questions. The truth, as often happens, seemed more complex than any viral caption allowed. Insiders later suggested producers were divided on how the segment unfolded. Some felt it showcased authentic dialogue rarely seen on mainstream television, while others worried it crossed into discomfort for viewers seeking lighter content. Denzel's team reportedly declined to escalate the situation publicly, choosing silence over spectacle. This decision only fueled speculation, allowing narratives to grow without official clarification. Joy Behar addressed the moment days later in a brief comment, stating that passionate discussions are inevitable when strong opinions meet. She emphasized respect for Denzel's career and contributions, though she did not retract her questions. The statement did little to calm online debate, where users dissected body language, tone, and timing as if analyzing a courtroom transcript. Fans of Denzel highlighted his long history of avoiding public feuds, noting how rare it is for him to engage so directly. They argued that this made the moment even more powerful, suggesting it reflected accumulated frustration rather than impulsive anger. For them, the exchange symbolized the broader exhaustion with performative outrage and shallow soundbite culture dominating media conversations. Others argued that daytime television thrives on friction, and that the framing of the incident as an eruption was more about ratings than reality. They pointed out that intense conversation does not automatically equal disrespect. Still, the label stuck, spreading faster than nuanced explanations ever could. Algorithms favored conflict, and the story grew larger with every repost. Behind the scenes, rumors circulated that producers tightened future guest guidelines, aiming to prevent similar moments. Whether true or not, it reflected how deeply the exchange resonated within the industry. Denzel, meanwhile, continued his work uninterrupted, attending premieres and charity events without addressing the controversy, reinforcing his reputation for letting actions speak louder than headlines. Cultural commentators used the moment to discuss generational divides in discourse, noting how older frameworks of debate often clash with modern expectations of alignment. Denzel's insistence on individual responsibility sparked renewed discussion, both supportive and critical. The View, once again, found itself at the center of a national conversation about who controls narratives on mainstream platforms. Some audience members who attended the taping later described the atmosphere as electric but respectful. They denied any shouting match, instead portraying a serious exchange that felt raw precisely because it lacked theatrics. This version contrasted sharply with viral clips, raising questions about how much context is lost when moments are compressed into seconds for mass consumption. The incident also reignited discussions about celebrity expectations, particularly how public figures are often pressured to conform to approved viewpoints. Denzel's refusal to do so, whether one agrees with him or not, highlighted the cost of authenticity in a media landscape driven by instant judgment. For many, that was the real story beneath the surface drama. Weeks later, the conversation still lingered online, a sign of its impact. New viewers discovered the clip daily, reacting as if it had just happened. Each reaction added another layer of interpretation, distancing the public further from the original exchange. Memory blurred with myth, and the line between fact and exaggeration became increasingly difficult to trace. Industry veterans noted that such moments often reveal more about audiences than participants. The hunger for confrontation, the rush to pick sides, and the tendency to simplify complex viewpoints all played out in real time. Denzel's calm intensity became a Rorschach test, interpreted differently depending on personal beliefs and biases. Despite the controversy, there were no reports of apologies or demands issued privately. Both sides appeared to move on professionally, suggesting that the moment, while intense, did not cross irreparable lines. This reality contrasted sharply with online narratives predicting permanent fallout and blacklisting. In retrospect, Many analysts believe the incident will be remembered less for what was said and more for how it exposed the mechanics of televised debate. The tension between meaningful conversation and entertainment value was on full display. Denzel's presence simply amplified a conflict that already existed within the format itself. Fans continue to circulate longer, unedited clips, encouraging others to watch before judging. These versions often paint a calmer, more thoughtful picture than viral snippets suggest. Slowly, some viewers revise their initial reactions, realizing how framing can dramatically alter perception. The phrase "Denzel erupts" remains controversial, with supporters arguing it misrepresents his demeanor. They insist that firmness should not be mistaken for rage, especially when delivered without insults or theatrics. This debate has become a case study in media language and its power to shape public understanding. For aspiring artists and public figures, the moment serves as a cautionary tale. Speaking honestly on live television carries risk, particularly when nuance clashes with format constraints. Denzel's choice to stand by his principles, regardless of backlash, is seen by some as courageous and by others as unnecessarily provocative. As time passes, the intensity of the discourse slowly cools, but the clip remains archived, ready to resurface whenever similar topics arise. It has become a reference point, invoked whenever discussions turn to accountability, media framing, or celebrity pushback against hosts. Whether one views the exchange as confrontation or conversation, it undeniably struck a nerve. It reminded viewers that real dialogue is often uncomfortable and rarely tidy. In a media environment polished to perfection, raw moments stand out, even when they resist easy categorization. Denzel Washington has not publicly revisited the incident, maintaining his long-standing habit of avoiding prolonged media disputes. This silence, intentional or not, leaves space for interpretation, allowing supporters and critics alike to project their own conclusions onto the moment. In the end, the story continues to live in the gray space between fact and narrative. What actually happened on that stage may never be universally agreed upon, but its impact is undeniable. It forced audiences to confront how quickly we label, judge, and amplify, often before fully listening to what was truly said. Long after the initial wave of reactions faded, media scholars continued referencing the exchange as an example of how legacy television struggles to contain complex viewpoints. They argued that Denzel's calm resistance disrupted the usual rhythm of quick agreement or playful disagreement that daytime shows rely on. Instead of fitting neatly into expected roles, he challenged the format itself, making the moment linger beyond its original airtime. Online fan communities dedicated to Denzel dissected his words carefully, transcribing the exchange line by line. Many praised his discipline in refusing to escalate emotionally despite repeated interruptions. To them, his restraint was the real eruption, a quiet defiance against being boxed into simplified narratives. These fans emphasized that composure can be more powerful than volume. Meanwhile, critics of Denzel's stance argued that celebrity influence carries responsibility, and that public figures should be more mindful of how their words resonate with marginalized audiences. They felt Joy Behar's questions reflected legitimate concerns. This divide underscored how the same conversation can be interpreted as courageous honesty by some and harmful oversimplification by others. Television insiders later suggested that moments like this are both feared and secretly welcomed by networks. While uncomfortable in the moment, they generate weeks of engagement, free publicity, and renewed relevance. The Denzel and Joy exchange became proof that authenticity, even when tense, still commands attention in an oversaturated media landscape. Some viewers admitted that the viral framing initially misled them, expecting shouting and chaos. They were surprised to find a measured but intense dialogue instead. This realization prompted broader skepticism towards sensational headlines, encouraging a small but notable shift towards seeking full context before forming opinions. That discussion also reignited interest in Denzel's past interviews, where similar themes of discipline, faith, and self-determination appeared consistently. Supporters argued this demonstrated ideological continuity rather than sudden provocation. They claimed the so-called eruption was simply a rare moment when those beliefs collided head-on with a confrontational setting. Joy Behar's long career on The View was also re-evaluated in light of the exchange. Some praised her for asking questions others might avoid, while critics accused her of prioritizing provocation over dialogue. Regardless, the moment reaffirmed her reputation as a host unafraid of tension, even when it risks backlash. Younger audiences, encountering the clip primarily through short-form platforms, often reacted differently than those who watched the full episode. Without context, facial expressions and clipped sentences took on exaggerated meanings. This generational gap highlighted how media consumption habits shape emotional responses as much as the content itself. Advertising analysts noted a brief spike in viewership for subsequent episodes of The View, suggesting curiosity-driven tuning rather than loyal fandom. Controversy, once again, proved to be a powerful magnet, yet it also raised questions about sustainability, as repeated clashes risk alienating audiences seeking substance over spectacle. In acting circles, colleagues reportedly admired Denzel's refusal to backtrack or issue clarifying statements. They viewed his silence as confidence, and understanding that not every moment requires explanation. This approach contrasted sharply with modern crisis management strategies that often involve immediate apologies or social media threads. The exchange also became a teaching point in communication workshops, illustrating how tone, pacing, and bodied language can dramatically influence perception. Denzel's steady delivery was cited as an example of assertive communication, while Joy's interruptions were analyzed for their impact on conversational balance. Over time, parody accounts and satirical takes emerged, exaggerating the incident for humor. While some found these harmless, others worried they further distorted public understanding. Comedy, like headlines, often favors extremes, flattening nuance for quick laughs. The moment's endurance speaks to a broader cultural hunger for unscripted truth. Audiences increasingly sense when conversations are overly rehearsed, and authenticity, even when uncomfortable, cuts through that fatigue. Denzel's presence brought gravity to a space usually defined by lighter exchanges. As newer controversies replaced older ones, the exchange slowly slipped from trending lists, yet it remains searchable, bookmarked, and referenced. Its legacy persisted not as a scandal with consequences, but as a conversation that refused to be neatly resolved. Ultimately, the additional chapters written by audiences, commentators, and algorithms transformed a single interview into a multi-layered narrative. What began as a daytime talk show segment evolved into a mirror reflecting how society handles disagreement, authority, and authenticity in the public eye. As analysts revisited the footage months later, many noted how the silence between exchanges carried as much meaning as the spoken words. Denzel's pauses were interpreted as deliberate, moments where he chose restraint over reaction. In an era dominated by instant responses, that hesitation stood out, suggesting thoughtfulness rather than uncertainty. Viewers who noticed this detail began reframing the interaction as a lesson in controlled dialogue rather than televised conflict. Academic discussions around media ethics briefly spotlighted the segment, questioning whether talk shows adequately prepare for guests who resist binary framing. Denzel's refusal to simplify his worldview exposed limitations within the format itself. Scholars argued that such platforms often reward emotional extremes, leaving little room for layered perspectives that demand patience from both hosts and audiences. Fan edits soon appeared online, overlaying dramatic music or captions that reframed the exchange as a heroic stand or a hostile clash. These reinterpretations further distanced viewers from the original tone. Each edit subtly altered intent, reinforcing how easily digital tools can reshape collective memory into something more cinematic than factual. Some longtime viewers of The View expressed fatigue, claiming that confrontations were becoming predictable rather than enlightening. For them, the Denzel moment symbolized a turning point, where curiosity outweighed comfort. They questioned whether the show's structure truly encourages understanding or simply cycles through opposing viewpoints for engagement. Public relations experts cited Denzel's post-incident silence as a masterclass in narrative discipline. By refusing to comment, he avoided prolonging the controversy, allowing public interest to peak and then naturally decline. This strategy contrasted sharply with the modern impulse to clarify, defend, and reframe endlessly across platforms. Meanwhile, aspiring actors and creatives discussed the moment in workshops and forums, debating the risks of authenticity. Many acknowledged that standing firm on personal beliefs can invite backlash, but also command respect. Denzel's career longevity was often cited as evidence that integrity, while costly in the moment, can pay dividends over time. International audiences, less familiar with the View's internal dynamics, reacted with surprise at the intensity of the exchange. For them, it highlighted cultural differences in televised debate, where American talk shows often blur the line between discussion and confrontation. This global reaction added another layer to the already complex reception. Comment sections became battlegrounds, with users projecting broader societal frustrations onto the clip. The exchange was no longer just about Denzel and Joy, but about authority, generational divides, and who gets to define truth on public platforms. The interview became a vessel for unresolved cultural tensions. Over time, even some early critics softened their stance, acknowledging that initial reactions were shaped by sensational headlines rather than full context. Watching longer clips prompted reconsideration, proving how easily first impressions can mislead. This gradual shift reinforced calls for slower consumption of media. Television historians later compared the moment to past talk show clashes that gained mythic status. They noted a pattern: such incidents are rarely explosive in real time, but become amplified through repetition and reinterpretation. The Denzel exchange fit neatly into this tradition of retrospectively inflated drama. Younger commentators framed the incident as a clash between depth and performative discourse. They argued that Denzel's approach demanded attention spans longer than social platforms typically allow. This mismatch, they claimed, was the real source of discomfort, not the content of his words. As awards season discussions resurfaced, the controversy briefly reappeared, tied loosely to Denzel's ongoing influence in Hollywood. Yet it never impacted his professional standing, reinforcing the idea that respect built over decades is not easily shaken by a single tense conversation. Media literacy advocates began using the clip as an example in workshops, encouraging viewers to question framing, editing, and language. Terms like ERUPTS were dissected to show how emotional cues are manufactured. The incident became less about celebrity and more about critical consumption. In hindsight, the exchange revealed how rare it is to see discomfort allowed to exist without resolution on television. There was no tidy conclusion, no shared laugh to reset the mood. That unresolved tension is precisely what made the moment linger, resisting the usual forgettable cycle of daytime programming. Ultimately, the added chapters written by Time transformed the interview into a quiet landmark, not because of outrage or scandal, but because it exposed how easily conversation becomes conflict when nuance is unwelcome. The moment remains a reminder that listening, not volume, defines the true power of a voice. As time moved forward, the interview slowly transitioned from trending topic to reference point, something commentators casually mentioned when discussing media clashes. It no longer carried shock value, but it retained symbolic weight. The fact that it was still remembered at all spoke volumes in a culture where outrage usually expires within days. Denzel's measured resistance had carved out a rare kind of longevity. Some journalists later reflected that the real discomfort came from unpredictability. Denzel did not play the expected role of either agreeable guest or outraged opponent. Instead, he occupied an in-between space that unsettled the rhythm of the show. That unpredictability, more than any specific sentence, is what made producers and audiences uneasy. Viewers who revisited the episode years later often described a different emotional reaction than their first watch. With distance, the tension felt less explosive and more introspective. What once seemed confrontational began to resemble a philosophical disagreement unfolding in real time, stripped of the dramatic lens applied by early coverage. The moment also fueled discussions about respectability and tone policing. Supporters argued that Denzel was criticized not for what he said, but for refusing to soften his convictions. Critics countered that tone always matters in public discourse. This unresolved debate ensured the clip remained relevant whenever similar controversies emerged. Within Hollywood, the incident quietly reinforced Denzel's reputation as someone unwilling to trade authenticity for approval. Younger actors reportedly cited the exchange when discussing the pressures of public image. For them, it served as proof that longevity comes from consistency, not from bending to every prevailing narrative. Meanwhile, daytime television continued its cycle of debates and disagreements, yet few moments carried the same afterlife. This contrast only strengthened the perception that the Denzel exchange tapped into something deeper than routine sparring. It resonated because it felt personal, grounded in lived experience rather than performance. Some cultural critics suggested that the word "ERUPTS" said more about audience expectations than about Denzel's behavior. It revealed how firmness from certain figures is quickly framed as aggression. This observation sparked broader conversations about language, power, and who is allowed to speak with authority without being mischaracterized. Over time, the clip became less about sides and more about reflection. Teachers, mentors, and speakers referenced it to encourage critical thinking and emotional discipline. The idea that strength can be calm, and disagreement can be respectful, slowly emerged as the more enduring takeaway. Even those who disagreed with Denzel's views began to acknowledge his consistency. There was no backpedaling, no reframing to appease critics. That steadiness earned a level of respect separate from agreement, something increasingly rare in polarized discourse. The View itself continued to book high-profile guests, but audience awareness had shifted slightly. Viewers became more alert to interruptions, framing, and tone, perhaps subconsciously influenced by past moments like this one. The show had not changed overnight, but the audience had learned to watch more critically. In retrospectives, the exchange was often described as a crossroads between old-school conviction and modern media dynamics. Denzel represented an era less concerned with instant validation, while the format demanded immediacy and clarity. That friction was never resolved, and perhaps never could be. As newer generations discovered Denzel's body of work, the interview surfaced again, detached from its original context. To them, it was not scandal but character study. Another piece in understanding a figure defined by discipline and principle. The controversy softened into background noise. Commentators eventually agreed on one thing: the moment could not be reduced to a single emotion. It was not pure anger, nor pure calm, but a complex blend of frustration, dignity, and restraint. That complexity is precisely why it resisted fading completely. In a media environment obsessed with extremes, the exchange quietly challenged viewers to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. There was no clear winner, no viral punchline that neatly wrapped the story. Instead, it lingered as an unresolved conversation. And so, the story continues to exist not as a definitive clash, but as a moment suspended in interpretation. Each time it is revisited, it reveals something new about the viewer, the culture, and the fragile space where honest dialogue meets public spectacle.